Hello and welcome to this Green Bond webinar. I would say we just wait for just another second before we get started, but of course I would like to welcome everyone who is in this webinar already. So as we are on 2 p.m. in Europe and 11 a.m. in Brazil sharp, I think we should just get started. So again, hi and welcome everyone to this Green Bond webinar, which will give a compact overview of the Green Bond universe with a special focus on external reviews today. My name is Christine Majowski, and I'm supporting this partnership as project manager at GIZ. Before we start, just a brief introduction into this collaboration. So in this partnership, we have been working for over 2 years now for the public benefit to support the development of robust and sustainable green bond markets in emerging economies. Our approach is to raise awareness and build competence among the different market actors through workshops, roundtables, and conferences, through bilateral advisory support, as well as through knowledge products such as research publications or also this webinar. In Brazil, we partnered with CBETS, the Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development, which has been a strong promoter of the sustainable finance and green finance agenda in Brazil. For instance, with its leading role in the Brazilian Green Finance Council and the establishment of the Guide for Issuing Green Bonds in Brazil, jointly with FIBRABAN. Jointly with CBETS, we have been engaging with market stakeholders in Brazil and also in other countries to share the knowledge that reflects the expertise of some of the green bond pioneers and leading experts worldwide. Our main partner is SCB, which has co-developed the green bond concept for institutional investors and supported the first green bond issuance by the World Bank in 2008. As structural advisor and one of the leading underwriters, the Swedish bank led a number of path-breaking green bond issuances, including the first green muni bond, the first non-supranational green bond, and the first corporate green bond. Moreover, SEB is one of the founding banks of the Green Bond Principles. It's a member of its executive committee and leads the working group on external review. We also partner with CICERO, one of the leading institutes for interdisciplinary climate research, which has been actively involved in the IPCC since the 90s. The independent Norwegian Institute was the first to provide a second opinion for green bonds and remains until today the largest provider of such, being recognized in the market for its science-based approach, deep expertise, and high integrity. And lastly, the project is being facilitated and managed by GIZ. GIZ is a German public benefit federal enterprise that works jointly with governments, international organizations, businesses, civil society actors, and research institutions worldwide to foster international cooperation for sustainable development. Through the Develop PPP program, we work on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development with the private sector to support innovative projects in developing and emerging economies for sustainable development. So coming back to the webinar and its content, during the next 45 minutes, you will get an introduction into green bonds by our experts from CICERO and SCB. You will gain an understanding of why green bonds matter, how the green bond market developed, and why issuers and investors have become so keen on getting involved in the market. This part will be covered by Ben Powell, senior banker at SEB, who will also explain the green bond principles, how a green bond framework is set up, and how the issuance process is structured. We will then also have Laura Albuquerque, senior technical advisor in sustainable finance at CBETS, who will talk about green bonds in Brazil. And we will also look deeper into external reviews and impact reporting to very essential aspects of safeguarding integrity in green bond markets. This part will be led by Christina Alnes, senior advisor at CICERO, who will also kick off now with a brief look into climate science. In the end, we will also have some time for questions, which we kindly ask you to submit via the chat function. You can submit them either in English or Portuguese. Laura Albuquerque from Sebets will kindly co-moderate the discussion. As we expect to have mostly participants from Brazil today, the slides are provided in Portuguese, but you can also access the English version of the slides on our website, and we will post the link to it just in a second. So without further ado, I hand over to Christina, Ben, and Laura.
Thanks, Christine, and hi, everyone. Christina Ellis from Cicero here. In the next couple of minutes, I'm going to provide some highlights over climate science, the motivation for green bonds. I think it's important to start by saying that we are already experiencing climate change. This graphic here shows the annual global temperatures from 1850 to last year. This is a visual representation of the approximately 1 degree of warming that has already happened. The International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, newly launched a report on 1.5 degrees. This report was a follow-up of the Paris Agreement and much anticipated in climate science circles. The special report concluded that 2 degrees of warming will lead to smaller crop yields, worse extreme weather events, slower economic growth, more people in poverty, and increase the population facing water stress by up to 50% compared to a 1.5 degree world. And the impacts will get progressively worse if temperatures warm beyond 2 degrees. The good news from this report is that we are not locked into 1.5 degrees yet. It is physically and technologically feasible, but it's politically very demanding. Sorry, I'm trying to get a graphic to work here. You're missing half the graph, but what the graph should show is that to stay within a 1.5 or 2 degree world, okay, here, sorry about that technical glitch. What you will see here is the historical emissions and then also emissions projections for the future, showing that to stay within 1.5 or 2 degrees, emissions must go to zero within a few decades, or we'll need large-scale negative emissions with associated risks and costs. We used to think that we would be safer if we don't rock the boat. Business as usual sounds like the least risky scenario. But when it comes to climate change, it's exactly the opposite. Business as usual means global warming by the end of this century at around 4 degrees. This would be an experiment that we don't fully understand the consequences of. Climate change of any degree will impact the economy and financial markets. These climate risks are typically grouped into physical risks and transition risks. Physical risks investors should expect include stronger hurricanes combined with flooding and sea level rise leading to significant damage. This has already been experienced across the Americas, as well as drought and wildfires. Many of these physical impacts that we had originally anticipated over longer time horizons, we can see today. And as an example, would be these interactions between sea level rise and extreme weather events. Transition risks are connected to changes in policy, liability, or technology that can impact markets and consumer behavior. Policy risk, for example, is connected to carbon taxes or carbon pricing, regulations, and subsidies. The correct pricing of these climate risks by the financial sector will be key to succeeding to the transition towards a low carbon, climate resilient future. However, this transition is not only about risks for the financial sector. On the flip side, it will also lead to investment opportunities for forward-thinking companies and investors, which brings us to green bonds, the topic of this webinar. The huge investment needs in infrastructure represent green investment opportunities and potential for further growth in the green bond market. Technological developments in clean technology are changing the landscape, and one example of this is the rapid development in wind turbines, as seen here. Green solutions are scalable, and green bonds can be used to finance both low carbon and adaptation solutions. Here you'll see some examples of projects that have been financed by green bonds. And I'll now pass it over to Ben, who will walk you through some green bond basics and market development.
Thanks, Christina, and hello, everybody. My name is Ben Powell, and I'm part of SEB's Climate and Sustainable Finance team. And in this section, I'll be really going into what makes a bond green. and describe some of the information the market uses to make that definition. But first, a quick description of what a bond is. So a bond is a debt instrument whereby a group of investors loans money to an institution, for example, a company or a government, and receives a fixed or variable interest rate in return. A bond is typically arranged and underwritten by a bank on behalf of the issuer. That's the company or government that will receive the proceeds of the bond. The main difference between a bond and a bank loan is that the bond is traded in an open market and can be bought by the general public, often through institutional investors. But what is it that makes a bond green? Well, green bonds are any type of bond instrument where the proceeds will be exclusively applied to finance or refinance new and or existing eligible green projects, and which are aligned with the 4 core components of the green bond principles. This definition was agreed upon by a group of major banks, investors, and debt issuers organized by the International Capital Market Association, or ICMA, and it set the foundation for creating a set of voluntary guidelines named the Green Bond Principles in January 2014. This is one of the most widely accepted definitions in the market. And in addition, many countries have adopted their own green bond guidelines, and many of them have referenced the Green Bond Principles when they've established their own country guidelines. Green bonds share the same underlying mechanisms as regular bonds in terms of the process between issuers and investors, pricing, tenor, and secondary trading. The main difference is that only predefined projects leading to an environmental benefit can be financed. For example, a property development company can raise a regular bond to finance all types of properties and day-to-day operations. However, a green bond can only be used for predefined projects with an environmental benefit, such as only for properties with 30% less energy use than the national average, or according to certain green building certification. The Green Bond Principles have been established to provide a methodology for green bond frameworks that ensure that green projects are defined and that the issuer sets up robust governance procedures to safeguard a sufficiently high environmental integrity, thereby making sure that it can deliver on its green promise and report progress to investors. So now we'll take a look at the 4 components that make up the Green Bond Principles. The first of the Green Bond Principles is use of proceeds. This concerns definitions of eligible projects and are typically divided into the following 3 areas that target climate and environmental stress: mitigation, adaptation, and other environmental projects. The second principle is the process for project evaluation and selection. The third principle is management of proceeds. This concerns traceability and monitoring of the money raised through the bond issue. The fourth principle of the GBP is reporting. As stated in the quality control module, transparency is the key. An issuer is expected to describe how it intends to abide by the Green Bond Principles in a document called the Green Bond Framework. As this document is made publicly available in connection with the green bond issuance, investors can learn about the issuer's intended use of proceeds and how the governance procedure is structured for selecting, monitoring, and reporting on investments. Consequently, the Green Bond Framework is central in the issuance of a green bond. In fact, it's considered one of the most important documents of a green bond issue, in combination with an external review. As the Green Bond Principles encourage a high level of transparency, it is recommended that an issuer's Green Bond Framework and internal environmental governance procedures are evaluated by an external reviewer, which provides evaluation through an independent external assessment. We'll go on to this a little bit later in the presentation. What do green bonds finance according to the Green Bond Principles, or GBP? Well, the GBP provide high-level categories for eligible green projects in recognition of the diversity of current views and the ongoing development in the understanding of environmental issues and consequences. The GBP explicitly recognize several broad categories of eligibility for green projects that you can see here. They contribute to environmental objectives such as climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, natural resource conservation, biodiversity conservation, and pollution prevention and control. The list you see here of project categories, while indicative, captured the most commonly used type of projects supported by or expected to be supported by the green bond market. Part 3, I'm going to go into a little bit of market developments with respect to the green bond market and focus on things like issuance volumes, currencies, type of issuers, and the types of geographies that have been issuing green bonds.
Ben, if I may just, hi Christine here, if I may just interrupt briefly, it appears that we have an issue with the chat function. So I think that participants cannot post anything at the moment. Eric, we're trying to fix it, but yeah, for now, Ben, please keep on going.
Okay. Thanks, Christina. We'll try and fix that as soon as we can. So yeah, you can see from this slide that the green bond market has seen rapid growth in recent years. From a total issuance of 39 billion in 2014, the market saw issuance close to $100 billion in 2016 and reached $175 billion in the end of 2017. And as of today, we've seen something close to $160 billion issued in green bonds in the market in 2018. This takes the cumulative green bond issuance over the $525 billion mark. However, as big as that number may seem, it's worth noting that it's still a very small part of the total market of bonds. Outstanding green bonds are estimated to account for less than 1% share of the total outstanding bonds in global markets. As the green bond market has grown in size, the diversity of the types of issuers tapping the market has also increased. The initial drivers of the green bond market were public entities such as supranationals, municipalities, and government agencies. These have been joined by financial institutions such as many of the leading international banks who have been issuing green bonds to finance their green loan business. Large corporations such as Apple have also entered the market in order to invest in energy projects, improve energy efficiency in their facilities, and help to reduce emissions in their supply chain. We've also seen the emergence of sovereign green bond issuance. This is where countries issue debt through their national debt management offices, specifically for the financing of environmental projects and initiatives. But in terms of geographic distribution, the countries represented in the green bond market are also increasing. Whereas European and US issuance dominated in the early years of the market, many developing countries have also started to become prominent in the market, and China has become the second largest issuer in the market in the last 2 years. Sovereign and corporate issuers in countries such as Indonesia, Nigeria, Mexico, and Brazil have also added considerable volume to the market in recent years. One final comment with respect to market developments, and that's with respect to pricing. When we look at pricing of green bonds, we notice that the demand has increased, and therefore the pricing dynamics have changed to the benefit of the issuers of green debt. While in the most part, investors are not yet willing to pay a premium for green bonds in the primary market, there is an improved performance of green bonds in the secondary market compared to conventional debt. For repeat issuers of green bonds, this is being translated into cost savings when they return to the market. Now I'm going to pass it over to Laura at CEBEDS for an update on market developments in Brazil.
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you so much, Ben, for all the introduction, and also Christine and Christina. So just to go forward with our presentation, I believe many of you already know that Brazil is known for its abundance in natural resources and an economy quite reliant on agricultural production and energy. And if you look into the chart that you can see, you see that green bonds have emerged quite recently in Brazil, with the first company to issue a labeled green bond in 2015. The company is called BRF. They are one of the biggest producers of refrigerated and frozen protein in Brazil. Since then, we have been following the market quite recently, all these green bond emissions have been emitted since 2015, as I have already mentioned. And if we do look into their profile, we can see the huge number of renewable energy of this sector that has been chosen by the companies. If you look to the chart beside you, will see that 54% of all the green bonds issuance in Brazil had a focus on the energy sector, and the other ones was focused on pulp and paper sector with two companies as Suzano and Fibria, and there were other issues for other sectors. We see in Brazil that our sovereign emissions are quite higher than the green bond one, but we do believe that it is a great opportunity for our country. We can follow this slide. And just for you to understand who is working with green bonds in Brazil, SABED has launched in 2016 in order to provide guidance for green bond issuers and other market participants in Brazil. We published these guidelines for issuing green bonds. We have them both available in English and also in Portuguese. And they are voluntary guidelines that are very closely aligned to the green bond principles that Ben just went through with you. And the focus is on outlining the issuance process in Brazil over the pre-issuance and post-issuance phase, over the whole process of issuance. Last year, we had many initiatives emerging in Brazil. We also had the launch of the Sustainable Energy Fund from BNDES. They have a specific focus on only lending investments to wind, solar, and biomass energy. In addition to that, we also had the launch of the lab on finance innovation that is secretariat by the IDB, by our Commission on Mobiliary Values, and on the Association of Development Banks in Brazil. This lab has three main working groups, where one of them is on green bonds. And today, the focus on this working group is on trying to foster the secondary market that Ben also mentioned, that is the one that is beginning to have a better pricing in the market. In addition to the lab, in addition to what SABED and FEBRABAN has also been developing as guidance, and also in addition to what BNDES has done, SABED was, for the last 2 years, the secretariat with the Climate Bonds Initiative and this initiative on green finance in Brazil. The difference between the lab and the initiative on green finance is mainly the public with whom we talk to and with whom we articulate with. The Green Finance Brazilian Initiative has a focus on investors and explaining to the market of investors the whole opportunity that we can have with the green bonds. It's a bit different where what we have in the lab that is looking into a more boosting and regulatory issues to boost the market. So considering what we have been doing in Brazil, you can feel free to get in touch, but this is our scenario today. I will now follow to please Ben to take the floor again.
Thanks, Laura. So this next section is really addressing the question, why go down the road of issuing a green bond, and why do investors choose to invest in green bonds in the first place? So let's talk a little bit about that. Implementing sustainable finance into the financial system is a process that draws on several interdependent practices, but there are of course also a vast number of specific initiatives some of which are mentioned in the slide above. A number of investment principles or guidelines have been developed. The United Nations supported Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI, consist of 6 voluntary principles that have been adopted by over 1,800 investors who collectively have assets under management in excess of $90 trillion US. Most investment mandates have negative screening techniques, but the PRI have also introduced the concept of positive screening, focusing on what investors want to invest in, for example, by setting social or green investment targets. Sustainable products create investment channels for investors who would like to engage in sustainability-related investment opportunity and communicate the impact of these investments at the same time. In addition to green and social bonds, other products are emerging. Most noticeably, there are green funds that have been established by large asset managers such as BlackRock, Amundi, Nikko, Mirova, Storebrand, and SEB, as well as green listings at the Oslo Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, and many other stock exchanges around the world. New policies and improved reporting will be important to ensure that investors and their clients are informed of the environmental impact of their investments. These include the European Commission's Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance, which aims to set out a process of creating a financial system that supports sustainable investment. So what are green bonds contributing to the market? Investors who evaluate and invest in green bonds achieve intelligence on climate-related issues, which enhance risk management capabilities, obtain diversification through a green asset class, contribute to a reduction in climate stress, and are able to stay ahead of the technology transition by quickly adapting to changing regulations. Further to this, green bonds offer an infrastructure that enables investors to live by their stated values, and it enhances competitiveness in a market where sustainability will increase its role in the years to come. Frederick Samana, Assistant Director of Amundi, one of the world's largest asset managers, identified the necessity of sustainable investment with the following quote. He said, "Markets are short-term, so they're pricing the likelihood of polluting companies being penalized at almost zero. People are beginning to ask if they can really make that bet. If you misprice those risks, then you failed your fiduciary responsibility." Issuers of green bonds improve diversification and flexibility of funding, and they deepen their dialogue with investors. However, the most important effect from issuing a green bond is that it establishes a targeted dialogue between internal functions such as finance, sustainability, environment, and project management. And it improves competitiveness by strengthening the focus on climate and environmentally related issues and implementation of sustainability targets. Drew Wolf, who's Vice President of Starbucks, has highlighted the importance of sustainability to Starbucks with the following quote. He said, "We've partnered on other sustainability projects in the past, but integrating our corporate sustainability strategy with a core part of our capital structure has raised our level of integration and cooperation." For society as a whole, green bonds provide an arena for financial and environmental experts within companies, institutions, organizations to mutually gain enhanced understanding and competence around the intersection of climate and environmental and financial risks. The importance of sustainable financing to society as a whole has been argued by the California Sustainability Alliance in the following quote. "Local governments wield significant influence and authority that can drive environmental sustainability within their jurisdictions." In general, green bonds can be one important instrument which increases the climate risk awareness needed across industry in order to support the transition to a low carbon society. It helps mobilize human capital and facilitates the shift in financial and real capital towards a resource allocation aligned with steering us away from 2-degree scenario. As these quotes illustrate, green bonds are delivering on these value propositions for investors, issuers, and for society as a whole. Okay, so in this next section, let's go into a little bit more detail on the 5 pillars of a green bond framework. As I mentioned, this framework is an integral part of any issuer that's looking to issue a green bond. The first of the green bond principles is use of proceeds and the definition of eligible projects. In other words, what type of projects the money from the bond can be used for. The issuer decides what their definition of green is, so that investors can decide whether they also agree with this definition. The second principle is process for project evaluation and selection. This concerns the development of a process for project selection. In other words, how you can make sure that the projects you select are indeed in line with your definition of green. The third principle is management of proceeds. This concerns traceability and monitoring of funds raised for sustainable finance. In other words, the procedure the issuer sets up to make sure the money raised in the bond is not mixed up with money from other sources, and that there is a way to easily track the money from where it is sourced in the market to when it goes to investment. The fourth principle is about reporting, as it is essential to be transparent towards investors and the market by letting them know what type of projects did indeed receive funding through the green bond and what type of environmental benefit this has contributed to. In addition to these 4 principles, external reviews through an independent external assessment is, as of now, considered a recommendation. It is not presented as one of the principles, but many investors appreciate and often require an assessment made by an independent party with environmental competence. The 4 green bond principles are used as a guideline when creating the green bond framework, as we will see now when we look at the example of Volvo. As per the green bond principles, the green bond framework consists of a list of eligible projects, a process for selection of eligible projects, a special account description described in Volvo's case as an earmarked account, and transparency through reporting. In Volvo's case, according to their green bond framework, the eligible projects are defined as a selected pool of loans and leases to vehicles that are funded in whole or in part by Volvo Finance Bank and that promote the transition to low carbon and climate resilient growth as determined by Volvo Finance Bank. In other words, the projects or assets of a bank are so-called green loans. Below this, you see the list of cars that are eligible for these loans and leases. As per the green bond principles, Volvo Finance Green Bond Framework also outlines their selection process, whereby the head of Treasury and the head of Sustainability must reach a consensus. A process for earmarked accounts and a plan for impact reporting. This example shows one issuer's approach when developing its green bond framework. Since different issuers work in different realities, the green bond framework should be tailor-made to reflect the different ambitions and capabilities of each green bond issuer. So now I'm going to pass back to Christina from Cicero, who'll go into detail with respect to the external review process.
Thanks, Ben. As mentioned, in this section, we'll dive into external reviews. We'll have a special focus on second opinions, and I will be using our process at Cicero as an example. So the key question is, what qualifies as green in the green bond market? For example, is it green to invest in energy efficiency in an oil-fired power plant? What about a startup electric car company in an emerging market where their products may replace fossil fuel cars, but they may also replace bicycles? The green bond principles, as already mentioned, they provide high-level process guidelines, and Ben went into these in detail. These are supplemented by country-level guidelines, such as those Laura mentioned, specific to the Brazilian market. Stock exchanges, green bond lists, and indices can also have criteria for inclusion. However, most of these guidelines do not go far enough in defining green to answer my questions. The way that we see it is that the green bond market is about enhanced transparency and opening up a communication channel between issuers and investors. We see our role as external reviewers to facilitate this communication. ICMA has earlier this year introduced guidelines for green bond external reviews at the international level. Here you see the key elements, which are integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. We view this as a positive development, as well as all of the country-level programs to provide guidance and support for external reviews of green bonds. Laura will later discuss the Brazilian program to promote the structuring and external evaluation of green bonds. External reviews play a part both pre-issuance and after the bond has been issued. This table shows an overview of the range of external reviewers to pre-issuance review. Framework consulting is separate from external reviews. There is a market practice where framework consultants also provide external reviews. However, the new ICMA guidelines go some way to discourage this, and there is an increasing awareness in the market about the potential issues and concerns that result from this practice. So if we look at the external reviews, the most common type are second opinions, green scorings and ratings, and certification against standards. Second opinions are the most common form of external review, and we'll focus on these for the rest of the webinar. There is a range of different providers and approaches. The vast majority of the providers review alignment against the green bond principles. Some go further on evaluating environmental criteria and governance. The rating agencies have also recently entered this space with their own green bond ratings or scorings. As with second opinions, there's a range of methodologies for these. The third form of external review is certification against standards. For international issuances, the most common standard used is the Climate Bonds Initiative, CBI standard for short. This standard is governed by an NGO, the Climate Bonds Initiative, and freely available online. Here's also an overview of the types of external review post-issuance. We see an increasing trend for issuers to complement an external review before they issue a bond with the review of their use of proceeds or impact reporting sometime after the bond has been issued. I will be going over impact reporting in more detail later. So here, as an example, is our second opinion approach. The second opinions are typically desk reviews, and the Green Bond Framework is the key document. Other relevant documents include corporate strategies and policies and project-related documentation. For example, if you are an issuer with a framework that includes green buildings, you might want to include any green building certifications, energy usage, and energy efficiency targets, and your policies on sustainable procurement of materials. The gears here represent the key drivers of our analysis. The green bond principles is the starting point, but as mentioned, they do not go far enough in defining green. Here is where we link to climate science, which we supplement with any relevant standards. For example, for green building, we would use rating systems like LEED and BREEAM. For every opinion, we point out strengths and weaknesses and pitfalls with the framework, providing transparency to investors and feedback to issuers. Our process also includes a step with questions and clarifications to the issuer before finalizing the opinion and assigning a shade of green. Here you can see our shades of green, which is our rating on climate risk. This reflects our view that we think it's key to take a non-binary view on green. Assets are not green or not green. There is a spectrum of green projects that all belong in the green bond market. As I mentioned briefly in the introduction, climate science tells us that in a 2050 perspective, we need to move to zero carbon solutions that are resilient to the impacts of climate change. In our rating, these are the dark green solutions. The electric car company I mentioned in the beginning would fall into this category. However, there is also a need for bridging technologies, and these represent the medium green solutions. We also need in this transition shorter term solutions, which by themselves do not represent the longer term solution, and these would be the light green technologies. Dark green solutions are the same everywhere in the world. because in the long run, all countries need the same solutions. However, the medium and light green shadings take into account the starting point of the region and the country. For example, when we were reviewing the Republic of Indonesia's Green Bond Framework, we looked at their sustainable transportation category that included both electric and fossil fuel public transportation, and we took into account the large emission savings from switching to from private to public transportation. And given this context, this can be viewed as a bridging technology. Whereas if we were to do the same review in Oslo, where I'm sitting today, we would view it differently given the already high ridership in public transportation and that there is good infrastructure already in place for electric buses. To end on a discussion on the light green and then the question of efficiency in fossil fuels. When considering these light green projects, we need to be careful to avoid locking in emissions or obsolete infrastructure. For example, new fossil fuel infrastructure, no matter how efficient it is, could not qualify. Efficiency in fossil fuel could if it decreases overall cumulative emissions. These light green projects are crucial to the successful transition. Since introducing the shades of green in 2015, we have shaded a total of 76 frameworks, and we're starting to see some clear trends by project category. For example, renewable energy is often dark green, efficient building very often medium green. And we see that there are fewer light green projects. However, we see this as an emerging trend. Just earlier this year, we rated Fannie Mae's Green Bond Framework as light green. As the largest issuer in the market, they set a key precedent on the importance of including lighter green solutions. So to sum up, before moving to impact reporting, green bonds open up a communication channel to investors, and external reviews help facilitate this communication. Creating a common language between the investors, companies, and scientists is key. And all shades of green are necessary for the transition. The key is to avoid locking in obsolete infrastructure. So in this communication between issuers and investors, there are some really important communication tools, which include the Green Bond Framework and External Review Report pre-issuance and impact reporting post-issuance. Green bond investors expect to be informed about the environmental impact of their investments. This transparency is key to the integrity of the green bond market. However, there are two important qualifications. The first is that the market is aware that there is a trade-off here, and no one wants to set the bar for reporting so high that it discourages new entrants. There are different expectations to a large corporation with a broad green bond framework and a large sustainability department, and a small issuer that, for example, wants to finance one solar project. We encourage to set impact reporting ambitions, taking into account the issuer size and capacity and the complexity of project categories to be financed. The key is to show a will to be transparent and a path to increasing data availability over time. The other is that standards for impact reporting are still evolving, and there is no one right way to report on environmental impacts. It is also key to be transparent on methodologies and assumptions and to be consistent. If you are using one set of emissions factors for corporate greenhouse gas accounting, it's advisable to use the same for green bond reporting, or to be clear on your reasoning for why you are using different factors. Impact metrics are a really important part of impact reporting and provide investors with quantitative measurements of the direct environmental or social impact of investments. Carbon emissions are often cited as a key metric, and while emission savings provide important information, we also encourage issuers to report on green metrics. And by this, we mean measures that show the project's positive contribution to the low carbon economy. An often cited example, which could be easy to measure, is the megawatt hours of electricity produced from a renewable energy source. For some projects, it might prove difficult to find exact quantitative measures. For example, with biodiversity conservation or climate change adaptation projects, this could be tricky. In these cases, a qualitative description may be just as suitable. And as always, transparency should be the guiding principle when doing impact reporting. As mentioned, this is an area of innovation and standards and guidelines are under development. ICMA has working groups on impact reporting and have published 3 sector guidelines so far: water and wastewater management, waste management and resource efficiency, and clean transportation. There are also additional guidelines from the multilateral development banks, and these are especially strong on the renewable energy projects. Earlier this year, the Nordic public sector issuers published a position paper on impact reporting, which provides general guidelines and could be also useful outside of a Nordic context. To sum up, investors expect impact reporting on green bonds. However, align reporting ambitions to the capacity of the issuers and complexity of the framework. The key is to be transparent on methodologies and assumptions. I'll now hand it back to Laura, who will discuss external reviews in Brazil. Laura, are you there?
Hello, Laura.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted, guys. Sorry, audience. So just as Christina was mentioning, we have a program now in Brazil that is called the Program to Promote the Structuring and External Evaluation of Green Securities. It has this acronym, the PAX, and it can be used by companies that are interested in issuing their green securities and get financial support to go through this program during their external evaluation. So the idea is that the program covers the costs of the consulting and the external evaluation of the green gradation of the title that is going to be issued. This is a limited program. It's not extensive. They have a process where they're going to select 3 companies, 3 possible issuers, not only companies, but possible issuers to be in the program. And to select this company, this issuer, there is a guide that has been also launched where the organizer of the program, that is Citaui, they have categorized the projects by the level of contribution to the climate change agenda to stimulate the emissions of green bonds of greater additionality. So they look into not only if the project is green, but if also it's aligned with the climate objectives of reaching well below 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, or if it contributes directly to the Brazilian national contribution targets, okay? So if you do need any other information on this program, please feel free to get in touch with the 2 contacts that we have in the slide. That is Carla or Deborah. I hand back to you, Christine or Ben.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura, and also Christina and Ben. Thank you very much for the input. So I will wrap this up. If you want to get more information on the key concepts that we covered in this webinar, you find on the next slide a list of references. If you want to learn more in depth about the topics that we talked about today, you can also view our online program consisting of 3 learning videos. You can access those via our project website and CICERO's YouTube channel. The links will be provided, and I see that we have fixed the problem to some extent. There was one question coming, but I think it's still not, it doesn't work fully. So I'm very sorry for any inconvenience here. We will fill the remaining couple minutes that we have with some questions that we have prepared here from our side. Please reach out to us, and you find here our contact details if you have any further questions. So also, if there's any question that you now didn't get to ask, please send us an email or reach out to us in any other way. And yes, with this, I would start a discussion. We have here one question that came from a participant regarding municipalities issuing in green bonds. So we often have the problem that some issuers do not have a rating. For example, municipalities in some countries they are restricted also in issuing debt. But here a question maybe either Laura or Ben can take this. What can municipalities with no rating do to issue a bond or to get to finance their green projects through green debt instruments?
Yes, so this is Laura. I can take this question. And besides all the persistent challenge that we have in general corporate bond market, and that the green bonds face additional barriers that impede that the market grows at a faster pace. And this is one of the barriers that we find here in Brazil still. Because given the restriction for municipalities to issue bonds, it can't be used directly to finance the projects. But we do have a suggestion, and this is one of the recommendations and prospects that we included in our joint publication with GIZ and SEB last year that we launched at COP23, is that a national body with adequate technical capacities that acts as an intermediary to your operation can help you issue the green bonds for municipalities. It can be issued on behalf of the municipality, but by the intermediary body. So this could facilitate the green bond financing for public projects, such as for a municipality. Now, I hope this clears a bit the doubt that was put to us. And since I have the floor, I would ask maybe to Ben or to Christina, maybe to share a bit more of the challenge and the main doubts that they hear from the issuers when they are in the process of the external review to their bond.
I can take that one first. Laura, thanks. I mean, we meet a lot of prospective issuers across the globe. And so the biggest challenge, I think, is that you have the first challenge that we usually face is the CEO and the senior management and to get their focus. And that this is a path that they should follow. So really, when you have kind of senior management buy-in with respect to efforts like this, it tends to happen much quickly. So we tend to try to start at the top and hope that kind of downward pressure from senior management in terms of a strategic objective with respect to sustainability and green works effectively. Some of the other challenges we face on a more micro level are that many companies don't have additional capacity. So many times we face the question of, we don't have time to do this, we don't have money to do this, and we have kind of other priorities. And it's a fair comment. Many of the smaller companies just perhaps don't have the capacity to do something like this. What we tell them is, well, because you have so many different types of issuers in the market, and that SEB alone has worked on hundreds of frameworks, that there is a lot of information out there that can really you're not doing this for the first time. There are many others who have done it before, and so there is a lot of capacity, a lot of knowledge there already. So we can help a lot in that process, and a lot of things are existing already. It's just perhaps tweaking existing systems. So there's not a massive investment, financial investment. There's an investment in time in terms of how you can change existing systems to be able to track the process more effectively. But that's just a short, a little bit of a short answer with respect to some of the challenges we face. Christina?
Yeah, sure, and I can add to that. By the time we start working with an issuer, Ben or someone else has done the difficult job of convincing senior management that this is important. So some reflections and perhaps tips that I could give is that we see a big difference in how well prepared issuers are. And the process of issuing a green bond is also is often challenging for the Treasury because it requires them to involve different parts of the organization than they are used to involving in their processes and discussing with. So we see that the issuers where they have a group that consists of both the technical side, the environmental side, and the financial side working on the green bond together, it's usually a smoother process. So that would be one tip. And of course, to also have planned out a realistic green bond framework that matches the procedures and the projects that your organization actually should finance and is interested in financing, and to have your own opinion on what qualifies as green. We stress that we provide a second opinion on this. It's important also that the issuer has a solid framework that we can start with. And while I have the word here, then we do have some other questions that have come in from participants. So I'll share some of those, starting with a question about green bonds in agriculture. So here I can start by sharing that we've actually recently reviewed a green and sustainability bond for the Agricultural Development Bank of China, which was of course heavily focused on agricultural development. And this is the largest issuance that is specific to agriculture that I'm aware of. And I think also I'll hand it over to Ben and Laura if they have anything to add from the Latin American context here. Laura?
Oh, yes. Thank you for the question. And in Brazil, one of the big actions, actually deliverables on the Green Finance Initiative was to transform an existent finance instrument that was for agriculture into a green instrument, that is the CRA, the Certificate for the Agribusiness. So already having the good and the right instrument to the process of issuing a green bond made it a great difference and helped the issuance that we saw on the chart that I showed for the companies for the pulp and paper and pulp sector. And that's the agribusiness is the main, is one of the main sectors, right? We do think that the Brazilian agriculture sector is the core of the country's economy. And in our NDC, we have proposed to strengthen the low carbon emission agriculture program as the main strategy for sustainable agriculture development. And in addition to restoring 15 million hectares and enhancing 5 million hectares of integrated cropped land to livestock and forest systems. So we do have a huge opportunity on the process for agriculture. And I can quote Fibria and Suzano as the companies that have issued using the instrument that I mentioned.
Great, thanks, Laura. Another question I think which you would be well suited to answer. Where are green bonds negotiated in Brazil and who buys them?
Okay. So we have been having many green bonds issuance nationally and internationally, and we can see a very huge difference in the volume that is management nationally and internationally. if perhaps we can go back to the slide where we have all the companies and the issuances, I think it would be great to have it.
Let's see.
But while we're waiting for that, there's also come an additional question on financial programs for green bonds in agriculture. And perhaps here you could mention the general program support programs as well that would be available to issuers in this sector.
So for the agricultural sector, I would tell you to take a look in the guide that has been just issued by Sitawi, as I mentioned, where we have a deep dive in each sector. And for agriculture, the types of projects that are eligible, we can have some examples on the low carbon agriculture and livestock, also on sustainable forest and forest management. These two, specifically the forest management, was the one used by the second green bond issued in Brazil, but it can also be used for native vegetation and conservation, restoration and recovery of areas. Also to recovering degraded areas and for sustainable fishing and agriculture. These are the main types of projects that can be financed through green bonds in Brazil. But I invite all of you to go deep into the publications that we have, where we can go further in each sector. So as you can see, just very quickly to close here, as you can see, one of the biggest issuances that happened in Brazil was from BNDES, more around $1 billion, and this was the hugest amount, and it was needed to be issued internationally. There is a huge effort that SEBED is doing with the national investors to make the value of the emissions in Brazil rise. And this agenda is going forward with the Brazilian initiative on green finance.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple of questions here about minimum ratings for green bonds. Ben, would you like to take this one?
Sure. There is no real minimum rating when we talk about green bonds. It really depends on the appetite from investors and their risk appetite and how much they want exposure to the underlying assets. So I don't think rating is really something that we think of as an impediment to a green bond. It's more of a impediment with respect to the investors. Investors, most of the green bond issuance that has come has been in the kind of investment grade universe. So clearly there are more mandates out there from investors globally that have kind of an investment grade mandate. But I don't think that that you can talk about a minimum rating when it comes to green bonds. I think if you are a lower rated company, but you have a good, strong green story, I think that actually attracts more investors than would buy a conventional bond issue if the framework is done correctly, and like I say, if the strategy is very clear. So we don't really look at ratings as a way of kind of locking institutions out of the green bond market. It's just how are you structuring your bond issue, and what is your strategy with respect to climate risk mitigation and transition. So I think everybody has a place in this market when it comes to green, irrespective of rating.
Thanks, Ben. And I see we're running a little short on time here, but there's still several really interesting questions. I think we'll just take one more before wrapping up. And this is to you, Laura. When you said earlier that it's more of a clarification on an earlier statement, when you said a third party can be intermediate issuer for a municipality, do you mean through a special an SPE or a special purpose vehicle or a type of company? If you could just clarify that.
Oh, yes. I haven't followed any specific type of intermediary or issuance to the municipalities, but I do believe this is something that we should, both of the intermediaries should be taken as consideration. I believe further studies on the best intermediary body would be necessary to give you this answer.
Okay, thanks for that. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of your questions today, and also apologies for the technical problems with the chat. You can see here all of our email addresses, so please feel free to reach out with your additional questions, or if you would just like to chat more about green bonds with any of us.
Absolutely.
Yes, and
thank you so much.
as already mentioned before, we have the slides on our website on emergingmarketsdialogue.org, and the one you see here, it has an E missing, so please don't forget this when you enter it. So there you find all the material. You also find a lot more material on our website. For example, on previous events that we have had workshops, roundtables in Brazil. We also have this green bond publication that we issued jointly. So there you find a lot more material of our work. And yes, as already said, please reach out to us for any further questions, comments. And once again, I want to thank everyone for participating, and we speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
And also big thanks again, of course, to all our experts here from Cicero, SCB, and Sebats.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.